welcome. Wherever you are listening from, allow the day to loosen its grip. Let the lights remain low. Let the room grow quiet. There is nothing you need to focus on, nothing you need to remember, and nothing you need to stay awake for. This story will move slowly, at its own pace, and you are free to rest whenever sleep arrives. Tonight's story takes place beside the sea. A quiet shoreline, soft sand, early morning light. It is a place where people walk, pause, and pass through without leaving much behind. And yet, on one ordinary morning, something was found there that would remain unexplained for decades. This is the story of the Somerton Man. In the late 1940s, on a beach in Adelaide, Australia, a man was found lying against a seawall. He was neatly dressed, his shoes were polished, his posture was calm, almost composed. At first glance, there was nothing dramatic about the scene. No sign of violence, no sign of urgency. Just a man at rest by the water. But he was dead. What made the discovery unsettling was not the position of the body, but what could not be found. He carried no identification, no wallet, no papers. The labels on his clothing had been carefully removed. There was nothing to explain who he was, where he had come from, or why he was there. As investigators began their work, the case did not grow clearer. It grew quieter. Each detail raised new questions rather than resolving old ones. A hidden note, a coded message, a suitcase left behind. Each discovery felt deliberate, controlled, and incomplete. This was not a story marked by chaos. It was marked by restraint. The man did not appear distressed. He did not appear unwell. There were no witnesses who remembered him clearly. Those who had seen him in his final hours recalled nothing unusual. He passed through the world gently enough to leave almost no impression at all. And yet, something about his death refused to settle. Decades passed. Investigations reopened. New technologies were applied. Theories shifted with time. Espionage was considered. Accidents were debated. Identities were proposed and withdrawn. Still, the man on the beach remained unnamed. This story is not told to alarm. It is not told to shock. It is told slowly, carefully, and without interruption. You do not need to follow every detail. You do not need to hold the facts in your mind. Let the information come and go. Let the rhythm of the narration guide you. If your thoughts drift, let them drift. If sleep arrives before the story ends, allow it to come without resistance. The sea remains steady. The shoreline is quiet. And the mystery rests where it was found, waiting to be unfolded gently, one detail at a time. You are safe where you are. The night is calm, and the story can begin. In the late 1940s, Australia was settling into a cautious sense of normalcy. The Second World War had ended only a few years earlier, and its presence was still felt quietly in everyday life. People were rebuilding routines, returning to work, and learning how to exist without the constant weight of conflict pressing down on them. Life moved at a gentler pace. Cities were smaller. Streets were quieter. Most people lived close to where they worked, and strangers were noticeable without being suspicious. There was a general belief that danger came from far away, not from within familiar surroundings. This belief shaped how people paid attention, and just as importantly, how they did not. Adelaide, the city nearest to Somerton Beach, reflected this mood clearly. It was orderly, conservative, and calm. The city was known for its structure rather than its chaos. Parks were maintained. Neighborhoods were predictable. Evenings settled early, and nights were still. Public trust was high. People left doors unlocked. They walked alone without concern. They expected the ordinary to remain ordinary. This was a time before constant identification checks, before digital records, before surveillance cameras on every corner. Movement was largely untracked. If someone paid cash, gave a name, and behaved politely, There was little reason to question them. Travel reflected this simplicity. Trains connected cities quietly. Luggage was stored without scrutiny. Hotels relied on handwritten ledgers and courtesy rather than verification. A person could arrive, stay briefly, and leave without leaving much behind beyond a name written in ink. Clothing mattered. Men dressed formally even when they were not attending events. Suits were common. Shoes were polished. Appearances carried meaning. A well-dressed person suggested stability, respectability, and belonging. It was not unusual to see someone dressed neatly at the seaside, even in the early hours of the morning. The coastline itself played a quiet role in daily life. Beaches were places of reflection as much as recreation. People walked along the shore to think, to smoke, to watch the water move. It was not uncommon for someone to sit alone, leaning against a seawall, lost in thought. Such scenes did not attract attention. They blended into the background of ordinary mornings. Australia's distance from the rest of the world also shaped perception. Though connected by shipping routes and migration, the country still felt removed. News travelled slowly. International tension felt abstract. Espionage and covert operations were ideas associated with Europe, not quiet coastal cities. The notion that someone might be living under a false identity did not register easily in public imagination. And yet, this distance also created space. Space to move quietly. Space to blend in. Space to pass through without leaving clear traces. For someone who wished to remain unremarkable, Australia in the late 1940s offered ideal conditions: a polite society, limited oversight, an assumption of good faith. The systems were built on trust, not suspicion. This context mattered deeply, because when a man was later found dead on a quiet stretch of beach, the environment around him had not been prepared to question him while he was alive. He had moved through a world that did not demand explanation, a world that accepted appearances and expected little disruption. The calm of that era did not prevent mystery. It allowed it. The streets remained quiet. The trains continued to run. The sea moved steadily against the shore, and within that calm setting, a story took shape without drawing attention to itself. A story that would only reveal its strangeness after it was already too late. The late 1940s in Australia did not expect secrets, but they provided the perfect place for one to exist. In the early hours of the first day of December, 1948, Somerton Beach lay still beneath a pale morning sky. The sea moved gently, and the air carried the cool softness that comes just before dawn. There was nothing unusual about the shoreline at that hour. It was a place people passed through quietly, a place where the night released its hold without drama. Shortly after sunrise, a man walking along the beach noticed something ahead of him, resting against the low sea wall. At first it looked like someone asleep, a figure sitting upright, legs extended, head tilted slightly to one side. The posture was relaxed, untroubled. It did not suggest urgency or distress. As others passed, they noticed the same thing. The man was well dressed. He wore a suit, neatly pressed, with a tie in place. His shoes were polished. His clothing did not look out of place for the time, even at the beach. Appearances mattered then, and this man looked like someone who had taken care with how he presented himself. What stood out was how still he was. Some assumed he had been drinking. Others thought he might be resting, enjoying the sea air. One person noticed that his arm was stretched out along the sand, his hand open, as if he had simply let it fall there. No one felt alarmed. There was nothing to provoke concern. The scene blended easily into the quiet morning. Eventually, someone approached more closely. The man did not respond. Authorities were called, and when they arrived, the calm impression remained. There were no signs of a struggle, no disturbance in the sand around him, no indication that he had been dragged or repositioned. The way he sat suggested intention rather than collapse. as though he had chosen that spot deliberately. He was pronounced dead at the scene. The man would later become known as the Somerton Man, but at that moment he was simply an unknown presence on the shore. A person without a name, without explanation, without a story that anyone could access. Investigators examined the immediate area carefully. There were no footprints indicating a struggle, no marks suggesting violence. The sand around him was smooth, disturbed only by ordinary tide patterns and passing wind. Whatever had happened did not announce itself loudly. It had unfolded quietly, without interruption. The man's expression was calm. There was no visible sign of pain or fear. His face did not show distress. His body did not bear obvious injuries. It was as though life had ended gently, without protest, in a public place that did not notice. His pockets were searched. Inside, there was nothing that identified him. No wallet, no papers, no personal letters. The labels on his clothing had been removed carefully, not torn away hastily, but cut, deliberate, methodical. This absence was immediately troubling. In 1948, people carried identification more often than not, especially when traveling. A man dressed so carefully would typically have some form of documentation, yet here there was nothing. It was as though he had chosen to exist only for that moment, leaving nothing behind to explain it. Witnesses were questioned. Some recalled seeing a man matching his description the night before, sitting in the same place. One witness remembered seeing him lift his arm slightly, then let it fall again, as though making a small, tired gesture. At the time, it meant nothing. People assumed he was resting. No one approached, no one intervened. This detail would linger. If the man had been alive the night before, then his death had occurred quietly, in public, without drawing attention. The beach had not reacted. The city had not noticed. Life had moved around him without interruption. As the body was prepared for transport, the scene remained strangely peaceful. There was no crowd, no panic, no urgency. Just a man by the sea, discovered only because the morning light revealed what the night had hidden. From that moment on, the mystery did not deepen through chaos or shock. It deepened through absence, through the quiet realization that someone could die in plain sight, fully dressed, carefully composed, and leave behind nothing that explained who they were. The waves continued their steady rhythm. The shoreline returned to normal, and the place where he had sat became just another stretch of sand. But the man did not fade with the tide. He remained unnamed and unexplained, beginning a story that would grow not through what was seen, but through what could never be found. Once the man was taken from Somerton Beach, the quiet strangeness of the scene followed him indoors. Under examination, the body revealed details that deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. Nothing about him suggested disorder or neglect. Everything suggested care. He was estimated to be in his early 40s. His build was athletic, his posture upright, even in death. His hands were clean, his fingernails trimmed. There were no calluses that would indicate manual labor, and no marks that suggested a physically demanding occupation. His appearance hinted at discipline, at a life shaped by routine rather than chaos. His clothing drew immediate attention. He wore a well-fitted suit, pressed neatly. His tie was knotted properly. His shoes were clean and polished, showing little wear. This was not the attire of someone wandering aimlessly along the shore. It was the clothing of someone who expected to be seen, even if only briefly. Despite the neatness of his appearance, there was something subtly unusual. The labels on his clothing had been removed, not ripped away, but carefully cut out. Every tag was gone. This detail stood out sharply to investigators. It suggested intention. Someone had taken time to ensure that the garments could not be traced back to a manufacturer or retailer. His pockets were examined again. They contained small, ordinary items: a comb, a packet of cigarettes, a bus ticket, loose change, nothing that revealed his identity, nothing that explained his presence. Everything he carried seemed chosen to be useful in the moment and meaningless afterward. There were no visible signs of violence, no bruises, no cuts, no marks of restraint. His body did not show evidence of a struggle. There were no defensive wounds, no signs that he had fought against another person. Whatever had happened to him had not been loud or forceful, at least not in a way that left marks behind. The position of his body was also noted carefully. He had been leaning back against the seawall, legs extended, feet crossed casually. One arm lay stretched out along the sand. The other rested near his body. It did not look like the posture of someone who had collapsed suddenly. It looked like someone who had chosen to sit, and then never stood up again. Investigators considered whether he might have fallen asleep. The idea did not fit easily. His posture was too composed. His shoes were still on his feet. His clothing was undisturbed. There was no sign that he had shifted position during the night. His face was calm. There was no expression of pain, no tension in the jaw, no indication of distress. It was as though whatever ended his life did so quietly, without panic or resistance. This calmness unsettled those examining him. Deaths caused by illness, poisoning, or trauma often leave subtle signs. Changes in expression, tension in muscles, disruption of posture. Here, those signs were largely absent. The body appeared preserved in a moment of stillness. Another detail stood out. Despite being found outdoors overnight, his appearance was remarkably intact. The cool night air had slowed decomposition. There were no signs that animals had disturbed him. The environment had left him almost untouched. Time, it seemed, had paused. Early theories began to form, but none felt complete. Some suggested a sudden medical event. Others considered poisoning. The lack of obvious cause made every possibility feel tentative. Each explanation answered one question while raising several more. What troubled investigators most was the consistency of restraint. Nothing about the man suggested impulsiveness. His clothing, his posture, the removal of labels, the absence of identification all pointed toward careful planning. Whether that planning belonged to him or to someone else remained unknown. The body did not tell a story of desperation. It told a story of control, and that story resisted interpretation. As the examination concluded, the man remained exactly what he had been when found on the beach, well-dressed, unidentified, and entirely unexplained. The early observations offered no clear path forward. They did not reveal motive, identity, or cause. They simply confirmed what had already become apparent. This was not an ordinary death, and this was not an ordinary life. Whatever answers existed were not written on the body. They lay somewhere beyond it, waiting to be uncovered slowly, if at all. Once the initial examinations were complete, investigators faced a problem that could not be solved with measurement or observation. The man had no name, and without a name, everything else remained suspended. His pockets had already been searched thoroughly. There was no wallet, no identification papers, no letters, no photographs. Nothing that connected him to another person or a known place. For a man so carefully dressed, this absence felt deliberate. In 1948, people did not travel lightly without reason. Even a short trip usually meant carrying some form of identification. Hotels required names. Trains required tickets. Yet the man on Somerton Beach had moved through systems designed to record people without leaving behind anything that could define him. The removal of clothing labels became central to this mystery. Labels were not missing by accident. They had been cut out with precision. Every garment was stripped of its origin. This was not the action of someone careless or hurried. It was methodical, intentional. Someone had ensured that even the smallest clue pointing to where the clothes were purchased would be erased. Investigators considered the possibility that he had been robbed. The idea did not hold. His clothing was intact. His possessions were untouched. There were no signs of struggle. Robbery did not explain the careful removal of labels or the absence of identification across every pocket. The possibility that he had chosen anonymity emerged quietly. Some people, even then, lived without fixed documentation: migrants, transients, those who wished to avoid scrutiny. But the man did not look like someone living at the edges of society. His appearance suggested stability, order, resources. He did not fit the image of someone lost or disconnected. Missing persons reports were reviewed. Police checked records across South Australia and beyond. They compared descriptions: heights, ages, physical features. No match emerged. No one had reported a man of his description missing under circumstances that aligned with his discovery. International inquiries were limited. Communication between countries was slower, more fragmented. Records were not centralized. If he had arrived from overseas, tracing him would have been difficult even under ordinary conditions. Without a name, the task became nearly impossible. Investigators also considered whether the man had intentionally removed all traces of his identity before arriving at the beach. The idea was unsettling, but it fit the evidence. He carried only what he needed. He left nothing that could lead backward. The man existed in that moment without a past that could be accessed. The absence extended beyond paperwork. There were no scars that had been recorded in medical databases. No distinctive markings that had been reported missing. No tattoos. Nothing that made him immediately recognizable. His body offered anonymity as much as his belongings did. This level of erasure raised difficult questions. Had he been trained to disappear? Had he learned through experience? Or had he been assisted? The systems of the time were built on trust. They did not anticipate deliberate anonymity. As long as someone behaved appropriately, they moved freely. The man on Somerton Beach appeared to have understood this perfectly. What troubled investigators was not only that he lacked identity, but that he lacked connection. No one came forward to ask about him. No family appeared. No friend recognized him. Newspapers printed his photograph. Appeals were made to the public. Still, nothing. He remained unknown not because no one looked, but because no one recognized. This silence gave the case its lasting weight. A person had lived long enough to become an adult, to develop habits, to dress carefully, to move through society with confidence. And yet, when he died, he left behind no trace that connected him to another human being. The missing identity was not a gap waiting to be filled. It was the defining feature of the case. Without a name, the man could not be placed within a story. He existed only as a moment, a presence on a beach, a mystery suspended in time. And as investigators moved forward, they understood something quietly but clearly. Until his identity was known, nothing else could truly be understood. When the man's body was examined more thoroughly, investigators hoped that medicine would provide what circumstance had not. The autopsy took place quietly, methodically, under the expectation that the body would reveal a clear reason for death. Instead, it offered ambiguity. Externally, there were no obvious injuries. No cuts, no bruises, no marks suggesting violence or restraint. His skin showed no signs of trauma that could explain sudden death. There was no evidence of a fall, no fractures, and no visible wounds. His appearance remained consistent with what had been observed on the beach, calm, composed, undisturbed. Internally, however, certain details raised concern. The organs appeared congested. The spleen was enlarged. There were signs that suggested the possibility of poisoning, though nothing conclusive could be identified. This finding immediately complicated the case. In 1948, toxicology testing was limited. Many poisons left little trace, especially those designed to act quickly and then disappear. No definitive poison was found. Blood tests did not reveal a known toxin. Stomach contents offered little clarity. Whatever substance may have been involved, if any, had either broken down rapidly or existed outside the scope of detection at the time. The medical examiner could not identify a natural cause of death. There was no clear heart attack, no stroke, no known illness that could explain the suddenness. At the same time, there was no physical evidence of homicide. This placed the case in an uneasy space between categories. The man had died suddenly, but without visible cause. The absence of explanation became the explanation. One detail stood out quietly. His shoes were clean. Despite being found on the beach, they showed little sign of sand or wear. This suggested that he may not have walked far across the shore. He may have arrived by another route, or he may have been placed there shortly before death. The body offered no clear timeline. The lack of struggle remained troubling. If he had been poisoned, it likely occurred without his awareness or resistance. His posture suggested he had not collapsed suddenly. He appeared to have lowered himself into position. This implied that whatever overtook him did so gently, allowing him to remain composed until the end. The official cause of death was recorded cautiously. The coroner listed it as likely due to poisoning, though the specific substance could not be identified. This conclusion was based not on evidence of a toxin, but on the elimination of other possibilities. It was a diagnosis shaped by absence rather than proof. This uncertainty left room for interpretation. Some believed he had taken poison voluntarily. Others believed it had been administered without his knowledge. Still others believed that the death might have been caused by a rare medical condition, undetectable at the time. None of these explanations could be confirmed. The possibility of suicide was considered, but it did not fit neatly. There was no container found, no suicide note, no sign of despair. His careful dress and composed posture did not align easily with impulsive self-harm. The possibility of murder remained equally unclear. There was no sign of a struggle, no witness, no weapon, no identifiable poison. If someone else had been involved, they had acted with extreme subtlety, leaving behind nothing that could be traced. The autopsy closed no doors. It only narrowed the hallway. The man had died suddenly. He had not died violently, and he had not died in a way that could be easily explained. Medicine had reached its limit. In the absence of certainty, the body was released. The investigation moved on, carrying with it a cause of death that explained little and raised much. What remained was a quiet truth. The man on Somerton Beach had died without revealing how or why, and the body that should have answered those questions had chosen silence instead. The mystery did not deepen through discovery. It deepened through restraint. And with the autopsy complete, investigators were left standing at the edge of a story that refused to speak plainly. Several weeks after the man was found on Somerton Beach, investigators uncovered a detail that quietly shifted the direction of the case. Until that point, the mystery had been defined by absence. No name, no documents, no trace of where the man had come from. But at Adelaide railway station, something had been waiting unnoticed. In the station's cloakroom, a brown suitcase had been checked in on the day before the man's body was discovered. It had been stored among dozens of others, unremarkable in appearance and untouched since it was left there. No one had questioned it at the time. Luggage storage was common, and people frequently left bags behind while traveling or attending to short errands. It was only when the timeline was reviewed carefully that the suitcase stood out. When police opened it, they found clothing neatly folded and arranged. Shirts, underwear, trousers, and personal items were packed with care. Nothing inside suggested haste or disorder. The suitcase belonged to someone organized, deliberate, and attentive to detail. And yet, just like the man on the beach, the suitcase contained no clear identity. Every label had been removed from the clothing, not torn away, but cut cleanly, just as they had been from the clothes the man had been wearing. This detail immediately connected the suitcase to the body. It was unlikely to be coincidence. Someone had gone to effort to ensure that nothing inside could be traced back to a manufacturer, a shop, or a place of origin. Among the items were everyday necessities: toiletries, a shaving kit, socks folded carefully. Everything suggested a man prepared to continue traveling. There was no sense that these were belongings left behind intentionally as a final act. They felt transitional, as though the owner expected to return and retrieve them. Investigators also found tools and materials that hinted at quiet self-sufficiency: a screwdriver, thread, and scissors, objects useful for small repairs. These were not items carried casually. They suggested someone accustomed to managing their own needs, someone who anticipated minor problems and prepared for them. What was missing mattered as much as what was found. There were no letters, no photographs, no address book, no documents of any kind, no personal notes that hinted at relationships or history. Just as the man carried no emotional artifacts on him, the suitcase contained nothing sentimental. It was stripped down to function alone. The location of the suitcase added another layer of unease. Adelaide railway station was not close to Somerton Beach, but it was accessible. The man had likely travelled through the city shortly before his death. He had chosen to leave the suitcase behind, keeping only what he carried on his person. Why he did so remains unclear. Some investigators believed the suitcase suggested intention to continue travelling. Others believed it was a deliberate separation, a way to remove identifying items before the final moments. Neither explanation could be confirmed. The suitcase sat uneasily between preparation and abandonment. The timeline made the detail more unsettling. The suitcase had been checked in on the 30th of November. The man was found dead early the following morning. This narrow window suggested that whatever decision led him to Somerton Beach had been made quickly, but not impulsively. The suitcase had been packed carefully, stored methodically, and left without visible urgency. Once again, the case resisted clarity. The suitcase did not explain who the man was. It did not reveal where he had come from. But it confirmed something investigators already suspected. This was not a person drifting aimlessly. This was someone who planned, prepared, and moved with intention. The suitcase became one of the most important pieces of the case, not because of what it revealed, but because of what it reinforced. The man had a life beyond the beach. He had possessions waiting for him, and whatever ended his life, it interrupted something that was still in motion. After the suitcase was catalogued and stored, it joined the rest of the case in quiet suspension. Another fragment without context. Another indication that the story did not end the way it appeared to. The trains continued to arrive and depart. New luggage filled the lockers. The station returned to routine. But the suitcase remained, holding the shape of a life paused rather than concluded. And that pause lingered, unanswered, just like the man who never came back to claim it. Several months after the man was found on Somerton Beach, the case appeared to stall. Investigators had no name, no clear cause of death, and no reliable trail to follow. Then, quietly and almost by accident, a detail emerged that would become the most enduring symbol of the mystery. During a re-examination of the man's clothing, a small, hidden pocket was discovered sewn into the waistband of his trousers. Inside it was a tiny, tightly rolled piece of paper. It had been placed there deliberately, concealed in a way that suggested it was meant to be hidden rather than forgotten. When the paper was carefully unrolled, it revealed just 2 words: Tamám Shud. The phrase was unfamiliar to many at the time, but it was soon identified as Persian in origin. Translated loosely, it meant ended or finished. In literary use, It often appeared at the conclusion of a text, signifying completion rather than destruction. The phrase carried a quiet finality, not dramatic, but absolute. Investigators quickly realized the significance. This was not a random scrap. It was not an accidental inclusion. The paper had been cut cleanly from a book, suggesting intention and care. Whoever placed it there had chosen it for a reason, even if that reason was not immediately clear. Public interest in the case reignited almost overnight. Newspapers published the phrase. Scholars weighed in on its meaning. The idea that the man might have been carrying a deliberate final message took hold quickly. Some interpreted it as a suicide note in its most minimal form, a way of saying that something had concluded without explanation or apology. Others were less convinced. The phrase was poetic, but it was also impersonal. It did not name the man. It did not explain his actions. It did not communicate distress or intention clearly. It simply stated an ending, without context. For some, this made it feel more symbolic than confessional. Police appealed to the public, asking whether anyone recognized the phrase or its source. Eventually, the appeal produced a response that deepened the mystery rather than resolving it. A local man came forward with a copy of a book he had found in the back seat of his car months earlier. The book was a collection of poetry, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. The final page of the book had been torn out. The missing words were Tamám Shud. The match was exact. The paper found in the man's clothing fit perfectly into the torn page of the book. It was undeniable that the two were connected. Somehow, the man on Somerton Beach and the abandoned book were part of the same story. What that story was, however, remained unclear. The Rubaiyat is a book that reflects on fate, impermanence, and the passing of time. It contemplates life's fleeting nature without offering strict moral conclusions. Some investigators believed the book's themes supported the idea of a deliberate ending. Others believed the connection was intellectual rather than emotional, chosen for its ambiguity rather than its meaning. The discovery of the Tamám Shud note transformed the case. Before, the man had been anonymous. Now, he was associated with a phrase that suggested intention, philosophy, or message. The mystery was no longer only about identity, it was about meaning. Yet even this powerful symbol refused to resolve the story. The phrase did not answer how he died. It did not explain why he removed labels from his clothing. It did not clarify whether anyone else had been involved. It added depth without direction. Over time, Tamám Shud became inseparable from the man himself. The case was often referred to by the phrase alone, as if the words had replaced his name. In a strange way, they became his identity, even as his real one remained unknown. A life reduced to a phrase, an ending without a beginning. And as investigators moved forward, they carried the note with them, hoping it would unlock something hidden beneath the surface. Instead, it became a quiet reminder that some messages are not meant to explain, only to exist. The paper remained, the words endured, and the meaning stayed just out of reach. Tamám Shud. When the connection between the Tamám Shud note and the abandoned copy of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam was confirmed, investigators turned their full attention to the book itself. What had first appeared to be a poetic clue soon revealed something far more unsettling. Inside the book, beyond the missing final page, there were markings that did not belong to poetry at all. Written lightly in pencil on the back pages were several lines of capital letters, arranged in short sequences. They did not form words. They did not resemble sentences. At first glance they appeared random, almost careless, as though someone had idly scribbled letters without meaning. But the more closely they were examined, the less accidental they seemed. The letters were grouped deliberately. Spacing mattered. Some lines were crossed out, others were underlined faintly. This was not idle writing. It had structure, even if that structure was not immediately understandable. investigators began to suspect that they were looking at a code. The possibility changed the tone of the case almost instantly. Codes implied intention, they implied secrecy, and they implied that the man on Somerton Beach had been communicating something, either to himself or to someone else. The question was not only what the letters meant, but why they existed at all. Cryptographers were consulted. Mathematicians examined the sequences. Intelligence specialists were quietly asked for opinions. Every known cipher technique of the time was considered. Substitution ciphers, acronyms, book codes. Nothing produced a definitive answer. Some suggested the letters were the first letters of words in a private message or poem. Others believed they represented locations, names, or instructions. Still others argued that the code was never meant to be decoded by anyone else. It may have been a mnemonic, meaningful only to the person who wrote it. One line in particular drew attention. It had been crossed out deliberately, not erased. This suggested revision rather than abandonment. Someone had written something, reconsidered it, and then chose to invalidate it without removing it entirely. This kind of behavior suggested thought, not impulse. Another detail deepened the mystery further. Alongside the coded letters was a faint phone number. When traced, it led to a woman living near Somerton Beach. She would later become one of the most enigmatic figures connected to the case. But even before that connection was explored, the presence of the numbers suggested proximity. The man had been near people. He had not been isolated completely. Still, the code itself refused to speak. Despite decades of analysis, no universally accepted interpretation has ever emerged. Each attempt at explanation solved one aspect while creating another contradiction. The letters remained stubbornly resistant to meaning. What made the coded book so unsettling was not simply that it could not be decoded, but that it did not behave like a puzzle meant to be solved. It felt personal, internal, like a record rather than a message. Something written to preserve information, not transmit it. This interpretation shifted how some investigators viewed the man. Perhaps he was not sending a message outward. Perhaps he was organizing thoughts inward, recording something he needed to remember without writing it plainly. A habit learned through experience, or necessity, or training. Once again, the case balanced between explanations. If the code was personal, it spoke to a private inner world we could not access. If it was communicative, it suggested a network that had never revealed itself. Either way, it reinforced the same conclusion. The man lived carefully. He did not write casually. He did not leave things to chance. The coded book became one of the most examined objects in the case, not because it explained anything, but because it confirmed a pattern. Nothing associated with the man was simple. Nothing was left unconsidered. The poetry spoke of endings. The letters spoke of concealment. And together, they formed a quiet contradiction. A man who left behind words meant to be read, and words that refused to be understood. The book was returned to storage. The code remained undeciphered, and the mystery continued, not louder than before, but deeper. As the years passed, the letters faded slightly on the page. The paper aged, the meaning did not, and the coded book remained exactly what it had always been. A doorway, not an answer. As investigators continued to reconstruct the final days of the man found on Somerton Beach, they turned to the people who had seen him while he was still alive. These witnesses had not known they were encountering someone who would later become the center of an enduring mystery. To them, he was simply another person passing through an ordinary moment. Several individuals reported seeing a man matching his description on the evening before his body was discovered. He had been observed sitting in the same location along the seawall, facing the water. He appeared relaxed, his posture casual, his movements minimal. Nothing about him suggested urgency or distress. He did not speak to anyone. He did not draw attention. He was present in a way that blended easily into the quiet rhythm of the beach. One witness recalled seeing him lift his arm slightly, and then let it fall again, as though making a small, tired gesture. At the time, the movement was dismissed as insignificant. It did not resemble a call for help or a sign of collapse. It looked like the absent motion of someone resting, perhaps adjusting their position or responding to discomfort without urgency. Another witness noticed him earlier in the evening walking along the beach. He was dressed neatly, moving at an unhurried pace, and appeared to be alone. There was no sign that he was meeting anyone or being followed. His behavior did not register as unusual. It fit comfortably within the expectations of the setting and the time. What stands out most in these accounts is not what the witnesses observed, but what they did not. No one recalled hearing raised voices. No one reported an argument or confrontation. No one saw him interacting closely with another person. If someone else had been involved in his final hours, they did so without drawing attention. The man's demeanor remained consistent across sightings. He was calm, composed, and reserved. He did not appear intoxicated. He did not stumble or sway. His movements were controlled, suggesting awareness rather than impairment. Even those who saw him late at night did not recall anything that suggested imminent danger. This quietness became one of the most unsettling aspects of the case. In many unexplained deaths, witnesses later recall moments that feel wrong in hindsight. A strange interaction, a sense of unease, a behavior that only becomes significant after the fact. In this case, there were no such recollections. The man did not stand out. He passed through the evening without imprinting himself on memory. His presence was so unremarkable that it allowed tragedy to exist unnoticed. The beach itself played a role in this invisibility. It was a place where solitude was normal, where people came to think, to rest, or to escape conversation. A man sitting alone against a seawall did not raise concern. It matched the environment perfectly. Even after his death was discovered, witnesses struggled to add clarity. Their memories were vague, shaped by the ordinariness of what they had seen. Time blurred details. The absence of drama left little to hold on to. What remained was a pattern of quiet behavior. The man did not rush. He did not seek attention. He did not disrupt the space around him. He existed within it, briefly and gently. This restraint deepened the mystery. It suggested that whatever ended his life did not announce itself. It unfolded in a way that allowed him to remain seated, composed, and unnoticed until the end. The witnesses could offer no answers. They could only confirm the stillness. And in that stillness, the man on Somerton Beach continued to resist understanding, not through complexity or spectacle, but through how little he revealed while alive. He was seen, he was noticed, and yet he remained unknown, even in the moments before his death. He left behind nothing more than the quiet impression of someone who had never intended to be remembered. As the case of the Somerton Man remained unresolved, attention gradually turned toward the wider world beyond the beach. The late 1940s were a time of quiet tension. The Second World War had ended, but a new, less visible conflict had begun to take shape. The Cold War moved without battlefields, carried instead through information, influence, and secrecy. Australia, though geographically distant, was not removed from this atmosphere. Military installations existed along the coast. Intelligence sharing with allied nations was increasing. Ports, railways, and communication hubs were monitored more closely than the public realized. Against this backdrop, the behavior of the unidentified man began to feel less isolated and more contextual. Several aspects of the case aligned uncomfortably well with intelligence activity. The deliberate removal of clothing labels suggested an awareness of traceability. The absence of identification hinted at compartmentalization, a practice common in covert work where identities were temporary and interchangeable. The presence of coded writing, even if never conclusively deciphered, reinforced the idea that information was being recorded discreetly. The man's composure also drew attention. Witnesses did not describe anxiety, panic, or distress. Instead, they remembered restraint, control, emotional neutrality. This demeanor fit the profile of someone trained to avoid attention and maintain calm under pressure. If he was involved in something sensitive, it did not manifest outwardly. The Tamám Shud note complicated the picture further. Some investigators speculated that it could indicate the end of an operation rather than the end of a life. The phrase carried ambiguity. It did not declare despair or intent. It simply stated completion. In an intelligence context, such language could be symbolic rather than literal. The coded book intensified speculation. Intelligence agencies often use book ciphers and personal encoding methods that were meaningless to outsiders. The fact that no one could break the code did not rule out this possibility. In some cases, codes were designed to be temporary, destroyed once their purpose was fulfilled. Meaning was not meant to survive. Another detail quietly supported this theory. The man appeared physically fit, yet his calves were unusually well developed, suggesting a background in activities such as ballet, athletics, or possibly military training. This detail alone meant little, but combined with others, it added texture to the speculation. The suitcase at the train station also fit an espionage framework. It contained functional items, but nothing personal. No photographs, no letters, no emotional attachments. Everything served a purpose. Nothing tied him to a private life. This was consistent with someone living under controlled identity parameters. Despite all of this, there was a critical absence. No intelligence agency ever claimed him. No documents were declassified that confirmed involvement. No operative ever identified him as a colleague or asset. The silence from official channels was complete. This absence weakened the theory, but did not erase it. Espionage work was often designed to leave no trace. Failed operations were not acknowledged. Operatives who died without exposure were sometimes quietly forgotten. The lack of confirmation could be interpreted as denial, or simply as the system working as intended. Others argued against the espionage explanation entirely. They pointed out that intelligence operations rarely end so publicly, in such an uncontrolled setting. A body left on a beach, found by chance, did not align with professional extraction or containment. If the man had been involved in sensitive work, his death was handled poorly. The truth may lie somewhere between extremes. He may not have been an operative, but someone adjacent to covert activity. A courier, a contact, a civilian drawn into something he did not fully control. Or he may have simply lived a life that required anonymity, adopting behaviors that resembled espionage without belonging to it. As with every theory in this case, the Cold War explanation answered some questions while creating others. It fit the secrecy. It fit the code. It fit the restraint. But it did not explain the ending. Why there? Why alone? Why unfinished? In the absence of confirmation, the espionage theory remains suspended, not proven, not dismissed, existing quietly alongside all other possibilities. And perhaps that is where it belongs. In a time defined by hidden conflicts and unspoken tensions, the man on Somerton Beach remains a reflection of his era, a figure shaped by secrecy, restraint, and silence. Whether he was part of something larger or simply lived in its shadow may never be known. The Cold War moved on. Governments changed, files closed, and the man remained unnamed, his possible role dissolving into history, leaving behind only questions that never demanded answers loudly enough to be resolved. As years passed and the mystery of the Somerton Man refused to settle, the case slowly shifted from active investigation to historical enigma. Yet it never disappeared entirely. Instead, it waited, resurfacing whenever new methods or renewed curiosity offered the possibility of progress. Each generation returned to the same question, carrying different tools but facing the same silence. In the decades following his death, police revisited the case several times, often prompted by public interest rather than new evidence. Old files were reopened, photographs were examined again, witness statements were reread with fresh eyes. But without a name to anchor the search, these efforts rarely moved beyond speculation. One of the earliest hopes for identification lay in facial reconstruction and public appeals. Images of the man were circulated in newspapers, later in books and documentaries. His face became familiar to many, yet still no one came forward with certainty. Recognition never arrived. The image lingered without connection. As forensic science advanced, attention turned toward what the body itself might still reveal. Decades after his burial, discussions began around the possibility of exhumation. The idea was controversial, but it carried promise. New technologies could extract information that had once been inaccessible. Eventually, the decision was made. The Somerton Man's remains were exhumed, so that modern forensic analysis could be applied. DNA was carefully collected, preserved, and examined. This process was slow and deliberate, shaped by respect as much as by curiosity. The hope was simple but profound, that biology might succeed where records had failed. Initial results confirmed that viable genetic material could be obtained, a significant achievement given the passage of time. From there, forensic genealogists began the painstaking work of comparison. Genetic markers were analyzed against databases, searching for distant relatives who might share common ancestry. Progress came quietly. Researchers were able to determine aspects of his physical background that had never been known with confidence. His ancestry suggested European origins, narrowing possibilities without resolving them. Each discovery felt close to revelation, yet stopped just short of certainty. At the same time, renewed interest in the case brought fresh interpretations of older evidence. The coded book was analyzed again with modern cryptographic techniques. Linguists revisited the Tamám Shud phrase. Medical experts reconsidered the autopsy findings in light of contemporary knowledge. None of these efforts produced a definitive answer, but each refined understanding. Perhaps the most meaningful shift was not technical, but cultural. Over time, the Somerton Man came to be seen less as a puzzle to be solved, and more as a life to be acknowledged. Researchers began to speak about him, not only in terms of mystery, but in terms of humanity, who he might have been, what kind of existence he may have lived, what it meant to pass through the world without recognition. The later identification efforts did not erase uncertainty, they transformed it. The question was no longer only who he was, but why he remained unknown, why no one had claimed him, why his life, however ordinary or extraordinary, had left such a faint trace. Even with modern science, the case resisted closure. DNA could suggest lineage, but not identity. Records could be re-examined, but not created. Time could offer perspective, but not answers. And yet, the effort itself mattered. Each attempt to identify him affirmed that his life had weight, even without a name. That anonymity did not equal insignificance. That mystery did not mean neglect. The work continues quietly, without expectation of certainty. It moves at the pace of patience rather than urgency. And whether or not his name is ever recovered, the later efforts ensure that he is not forgotten. The man on Somerton Beach remains suspended between past and present, not fully claimed by either. His identity still out of reach, but his story carried forward gently, by those willing to keep asking without demanding an answer. When the search for certainty reaches its limit, reflection takes its place. In the case of the man found on Somerton Beach, this transition feels inevitable. After decades of investigation, analysis, and renewed attention, facts remain incomplete. What endures instead is the space where possibility quietly exists. He may have been someone shaped by movement rather than settlement, a man accustomed to passing through places without remaining in them. In the mid-20th century, many lives unfolded this way. War had displaced families, borders had shifted, records had been lost or never created. Some people learned to live lightly, carrying little and leaving less behind. His careful appearance suggests a respect for order. His polished shoes, pressed suit, and controlled demeanor do not speak of neglect or confusion. They suggest intention, a person who understood presentation, who valued restraint, and who moved through public spaces without inviting scrutiny. He may have lived alone by choice. The absence of personal items, letters, or photographs points toward a life without visible attachments. This does not mean he lacked connection, only that he did not carry it openly. Some people keep their inner world protected, not from fear, but from habit. They learn that privacy is stability. Others imagine him as someone who lived between identities, not necessarily an operative, but someone who adopted anonymity as a way of existing. False names, removed labels, coded notes. These could reflect training, or they could reflect experience. A life that required caution teaches its own methods. There is also the possibility that he was neither extraordinary nor covert. He may have been an ordinary man whose life intersected briefly with extraordinary circumstances. Someone who made choices that were misunderstood, or whose final moments were shaped by factors that left no trace. What remains consistent across every interpretation is this: he was deliberate, he was composed, he was not careless. His life, whatever its form, was not chaotic. It was structured, intentional, and quietly maintained. The mystery lies not in confusion, but in how thoroughly he chose or was forced to remain unrecorded. Perhaps anonymity was not his burden, but his boundary. To exist without being claimed, to move without being followed, to leave without explanation. In that sense, the man on Somerton Beach achieved something rare. He passed through a world built on documentation and recognition without being fully captured by it. His name did not enter the systems that preserve memory. His story did not resolve into a single narrative. And yet, he was not erased. He is remembered precisely because of what remains unknown. His life invites attention, not through revelation, but through restraint. He asks not to be defined, but to be considered. As time continues, he becomes less a question to be answered, and more a presence to be acknowledged. A reminder that not every life leaves behind a clear outline, that some exist in softer focus, resisting categorization even in death. Who he might have been remains open, not because of failure, but because some lives are not meant to be fully retrieved. They remain suspended, intact in their ambiguity, carrying the quiet dignity of something that never demanded to be explained. In the years that followed, Somerton Beach returned to its ordinary rhythm. The seawall remained. The sand shifted with the tide. People walked the shoreline without knowing they were passing through a place that once held an unanswered story. Nothing marked the spot. No sign distinguished it from any other quiet stretch of coast. The case itself did not end. It simply softened. Investigations slowed. Files were archived. Leads were revisited and set aside. The man's name never appeared in records, but his presence lingered in memory, carried forward by those who could not let the quietness of it all disappear entirely. What makes this story endure is not shock or violence, but restraint. A man died in public, in plain sight, without disruption. He left behind clues that hinted at meaning without delivering it. Every detail seemed deliberate, yet none were loud enough to demand explanation. There is something deeply human in that kind of silence. Not every life announces itself. Not every ending declares its reason. Some stories exist without resolution and remain intact because of it. Over time, the man on the beach became less a mystery to be solved and more a presence to be acknowledged. His anonymity no longer felt like a failure of investigation, but a defining feature of his story. He was unknown not because no one looked, but because he had lived in a way that resisted being claimed. In a world increasingly defined by records, documentation, and constant identification, his story feels almost out of time. It reminds us that it was once possible to pass through life quietly, leaving behind only impressions rather than explanations. And perhaps that is why the case continues to be remembered. Not because it demands answers, but because it allows stillness. As the years move forward, theories may rise and fall, technologies may improve, new interpretations may emerge, but even if his name is eventually recovered, something essential will remain unchanged. The quiet dignity of a life that did not ask to be understood. The sea does not remember him. The sand does not hold his outline. Only the story remains. And now, as this story settles, there is nothing more required of it. You do not need to carry it further. You do not need to solve it. You can let it rest, just as the night allows all unanswered things to rest. The shoreline is calm again. The questions grow distant, and the mystery fades gently into the dark, where quiet endings often belong.